I think we should start off with, so Stan, the main touch point a lot of kind of our listeners, our watchers would have for you is with the vertical diet. It's been hugely successful, obviously for Owen. It's been hugely successful for a massive amount of our athletes over the years who it tends to be our main direction we'll point people in for their nutritional stuff. Could you give us some of the background of the vertical diet, or how you kind of started developing that thought process?
Well, it was mostly trial and error. As you know, I've been competing for over 30 years, since 1986. And on both ends of the spectrum, I dieted down using over-restrictive diets and excess cardio to compete at a very low body fat percentage in bodybuilding, and ultimately became an IFBB pro. And I also did a lot of bulking to try and take my 140-pound, 18-year-old freshman in college physique up to a 300-pound power lifter. And so on both ends of the spectrum, I did a lot of things wrong. I learned a lot from trial and error. I always said if I knew then what I know now, I may have been more successful, or maybe suffered, I think, less of the downsides of over-restrictive dieting and I think overeating on the bulking side, doing the dirty bulks. And I had well over 100 blood tests throughout my career. And so I was able to kind of see how these things affected me and affected my performance. We didn't have the internet back then. I didn't have the information we have today. Even my studies in exercise science at the University of Oregon were, woefully, I think, short of the information that we have now available to everyone at the click of a button on YouTube, or, just Googling. We've got a lot of great professionals in the industry now that I refer to. And so I took my experience and obviously applied it to myself. That's my anecdote. Applied it to my clients, which I had thousands of clients. I was a personal trainer all my life since college. And then, hundreds of high school, collegiate, and professional athletes that compete. And then more recently, in the last 5 years, partnered with a PhD RDN, Damon McCune, and bumped it up against the science to make sure that we were giving, accurate information. And so that's kind of how the vertical diet was born, just out of, I think, competing, coaching, being coached, collaborating with great minds and great athletes, and then just eventually just documenting that and providing it to people. And it's very comprehensive. It's not just diet, of course. As you know, we talk about sleep and nutrition and digestion and hormone optimization, all the things that go into a well-rounded program so that my clients can get everything that I need them to do to be successful. And I always said that really the vertical diet, kind of the way it came about, was I was trying to build a foundation, say, well, how tall can a pyramid be? Well, it depends on how large its base is. And so it's really about creating that base, and that base is more than just nutrition. Of course, it's sleep and exercise as well, and digestion. But the base includes all the macros and all the micros and the things that are important for, reaching the optimum body composition and maintaining health, which was very important, because a lot of what I do and did for myself throughout my career was kind of mitigate damage, because competing isn't necessarily healthy. I think I did a YouTube rant that said, if you want to be healthy, don't compete. There's a difference between health and fitness, fitness being the ability to perform a particular duty or task, and the fitness level required to be a world's strongest man, or to be a UFC champion, or even a 14-year-old gymnast in the Olympics, is not necessarily healthy. So a lot of what we do behind the scenes, even with a dad bod or a soccer mom in particular, dieting down and suffering from the female triad, chronic calorie restriction, amenorrhea, anemia, hypothyroidism. All of those things are pretty prevalent in the diet industry today. They were kind of isolated to the competitive industry for many years, but now they've leaked out into the general public, and people are applying those competitive competition diets and suffering from all those problems, as mentioned. And so a lot of what I do for athletes and for Gen Pop really is kind of mitigate damage, make it sustainable and healthy, so that they can have a better long-term outcome.
Stan, I think you're probably the main person I've seen in terms of trying to promote health among those elite athletes. So I think everybody kind of gets it at this stage that being the most, being the highest performer in anything isn't going to necessarily make you live as long as possible or be as healthy for as long as possible. But at the same time, as aware of that fact, you obviously really push home with the stuff like with, you talk about the CPAP with Eddie Hall or After. Terrible slip of the tongue there. The wrong one. So you talk about, making them as healthy as possible, getting people's bloods done as much as possible, even for athletes who are not on performance enhancing drugs. So it's interesting that you push the health stuff as much as possible. And have you seen that drastically or even, significantly improve these elite athletes' performance by making them healthier, by the common metrics you'd look at health maybe?
Yeah, and I was concerned about that when I started working with some really, I think high-level athletes is, what can I do for these guys? They're already genetically predispositioned. They've already achieved, an extraordinary high level of success. And, how much can you add to their performance? 10 pounds, 50 pounds, to a deadlift over the course of a year or two. And it becomes, you kind of are concerned that maybe you don't have a value add there. They've already kind of achieved all they're going to achieve. We were able to see an improvement in performance across the board with the athletes that we've worked with, but more importantly, we made their job easier. Some of it's just things like, mechanically speaking, being able to eat enough food for a large athlete. That can be a very daunting task. You've seen many, many videos of people large athletes trying to gain weight or maintain their mass. And so, we composed a diet plan that just made that easier on them. And then on the flip side of that, the dieting, just improving satiety and energy and trying to maintain some sleep over the last couple of months before competition. Things like that start to suffer. And so by utilizing a more micronutrient dense diet, less restrictive on the dieting end, we were just able to, so for people, it became more sustainable. They could stay closer to competition weight longer or more throughout the year instead of having the significant rebounds. And then they didn't burn out. We see that a lot on both ends of the spectrum. We see dieters for, this is bodybuilding, figure, physique, bikini, what I call the professional dieting industry. They burn out really quickly. They kind of get some severe metabolic adaptation and a lot of yo-yo dieting going on. And on the powerlifters and bodybuilders and strongmen and also the linemen in football, you'd see a lot of them burn out from a lot of it from overtraining, which some of that has to do with a lot of sleep and nutrition inadequacies, yielding those overtraining results. So we just tried to work with people on both ends of the spectrum by creating that foundation of things that are really important, and that includes just general movements, not overtraining as well.
Stan, one thing that really interests me there is when you're talking about the overtraining or athletes getting burned out after a certain period of time. I remember you talking about Hafthor when you came to work with him first, and the initial thing you did was actually strip his weight back and then build it back up, and I think he got to somewhere around 200 kilos with abs. Is that a kind of factor of just giving his body a bit of a break, or is that a very common thing you do with someone where the initial step would be to achieve a body composition and then move towards kind of a general mass figure?
Yeah, I think that's important for big athletes and just regular dieters. You need to achieve a particular body composition. I think you need to get your body fat into a healthy range. The larger you get, the more side effects that occur. You end up with metabolic syndrome. You get fatty liver, insulin resistance, high blood pressure, a host of things that are going to cause all kinds of health problems. And just losing 7% of your body weight. Let's put a number on it. If you're a 300-pound individual, you only need to lose 20 pounds in order to realize about a 95% improvement in fatty liver and improve insulin resistance and drop your blood pressure by 20 points. So those things are pretty easy interventions to make, but it's hard to convince a large athlete to lose weight because mass moves mass and their strength is kind of tied to their size. And I get it. I'm a power lifter at heart. But there's a lot of changes that you can make without any weight fluctuations to improve. Now, like you said, the CPAP, the 10-minute walks after meals, improve postprandial glycemia, which improves blood pressure, just including more potassium and calcium in the diet. improves blood pressure. So there's lots of things we could do. But more importantly, I think obviously you don't just train heavy all year round. You're going to periodize your strength training. And we do the same thing with weight. I don't think you should maintain that much body weight all year round. Just like you shouldn't maintain 5% body fat all year round if you're a competitive physique type athlete. You have to normalize that so you don't have, on that end of the spectrum, you don't have decrements in hormone levels and hypothyroidism and hypogonadism for testosterone lowering. So there's just not optimal body compositions to train at. And if you want to make progress in the off season, then I think that you need to be healthy. And so those are the interventions that we use to do that.
Oh, that's pretty interesting, actually. I've never heard anyone talk about periodizing weight for competitors. So let's say if you had that kind of 300-pound athlete, and let's say he was a strongman, because we're talking about them, would you be looking to come in at the heaviest possible for that strongman event, and then immediately after, would you taper off the weight as fast as possible, or would it be kind of a slow decline, start the prep phase, lose weight further? What would that kind of look like?
Well, this is another thing I learned from bulking up, dirty bulking as far as the health issues go, but also then trying to cut weight too fast for bodybuilding shows. You lose a significant amount of muscle tissue. And so you're better off at least trying to get your body's set point, however much of that we believe. You're better off trying to hold on to as much lean mass as long as possible, and then to take the fat off more slowly. Having said that, the first 30 days, there's a lot of water, there's a lot of food bulk, there's there's certainly a significant excess of fat from the bulking time. So I can take, at least 10, 12 plus pounds off of somebody in the first 30 days and not have any impact on lean muscle tissue loss. After that, I want to be more gradual about it. I want to be cautious to only lose muscle mass. Now, of course, those using performance-enhancing drugs are going to have a much better chance of retaining lean body mass, and so that becomes less of a consideration. But yeah, immediately after a bodybuilding show, you want to reverse diet. You want to gain back your muscle without gaining back too much fat. So immediately after a powerlifting competition or a strongman competition, I think you want to lose some body fat in order to get your health back, because we know, as mentioned earlier, that health and fitness aren't generally compatible when you're competing, and you're going to have elevated blood pressure and usually all those other markers I see, kidney and liver enzymes. One of the things that we mistakenly were doing, they did at the Arnold each year, was they would get blood tests for the athletes a day or two after the event, which of course, now your creatinine's just skyrocketed, and it's going to look poor on your kidney function just because of your EGFR is an estimation based on creatinine and weight. And so everything starts to, obviously your AST, ALT enzymes are going to be impacted mainly from myoglobin, muscle tissue breakdown, as opposed to, liver function. But those are all things that we consider. And so we want to, as quickly as possible, try and normalize those numbers, get our athlete healthy, get them at a reasonable body weight. And then, that's a good time also to build their cardiovascular base if you're programming off season, which becomes really important. I think we had talked about discussing some of this, and I think that's a really important thing that a lot of large athletes, I can't say large athletes, but bodybuilders and powerlifters, and maybe even strongmen, don't put enough emphasis on. The football players do. They definitely incorporate, even year round, a better. They don't get quite as big either, so carry quite as much body fat either. So that becomes really important. So we change the way they train. Obviously we just said we were going to periodize their training and periodize their weight. So we change the way they train as well.
Stan, on your point there of the blood tests immediately following the Arnold or immediately following a competition, and you obviously have these temporary heightenings of or possibly into like a risk factor in certain brackets of those values, how long after would you ideally wait from a competition before getting your blood test done?
I think 7 days would be sufficient on a normal circumstance when you're training regularly at home and not in a competitive situation. Probably 3 days out from a blood test would help to keep those AST, ALT, and creatinine numbers from being falsely elevated by, again, myoglobin breakdown. And this isn't just lifting. You go run a 5K the day before a blood test, you're going to see some of the same markers elevated. So I'm cautious of that. I don't do legs within about 5 days of a blood test, and I probably do my last lift about 3 days out, and then I go get my blood test so I can see what the numbers are, in the absence of all those interfering factors.
So you talk a lot about getting bloods as well. Do you think this is mostly a concern for athletes who are using performance-enhancing drugs, or the frequency they might get them and the attention they would pay to particular things, or the lack of attention they might pay due to whatever they're using, for example? But do you think natural athletes, even from kind of the amateur athlete all the way up to the maybe closer to high-performing athlete, is that something you'd be just as concerned about? And do you follow those same patterns and frequency of blood tests for the natural compared to a performance-enhanced athlete?
It's certainly more important for athletes using performance-enhancing drugs because there's potential really big downsides for health. Blood pressure being the biggest, the most immediate. That's a giant one. That's the first thing you want to intervene on is get, for these big athletes, get their blood pressure down, and then just weight loss and a CPAP and are kind of the primary drivers of that, and elevated blood sugars. But even the Olympic Center tests all of their athletes, and in terms of performance, if you've got things like vitamin D deficiencies, or particularly for endurance athletes and particularly females, iron deficiencies will have a huge impact. And so, yeah, we would like to see for competitive athletes a blood test, at least initially. If we find anything, then we can take action on that and do a subsequent test on those specific markers to make sure that we're making improvements.
Stan, with your own blood tests, you say like you have a massive bank of data there. Is there any gradual shift, or is there any move in a certain direction that you've noticed going from being a very high level international competitive bodybuilder and powerlifter through to a kind of prolonged career and then through to what you're doing now? Are there brackets you have simply moved out of in those blood tests, or is everything kind of around the same, slightly less extreme now than it was back then?
It was a lot more extreme back then, and mainly because of the weight. These numbers get better and worse as you decrease or increase body weight. That's, as I mentioned, a 7% body weight loss can resolve 95% of fatty liver. And that is kind of the primary driver of metabolic syndrome. Obviously, blood pressure is associated with weight gain, but every time that as I got fatter, I had my markers declined. My lipids elevated, my insulin resistance markers increased, blood pressure obviously would increase, and then depending on the type and quantity of performance-enhancing drugs, obviously your kidney and liver enzymes are also going to be impacted. So, we do everything we can for those athletes, again, to mitigate damage, and I detail that in the vertical diet because that's, I have a lot of experience with working with those kinds of athletes as well. And then on the flip side of that, I mentioned, the female triad and people who over diet or, are chronically dieting. We got to watch iron. We got to watch thyroid function so they don't start to get, metabolic adaptation and hair loss and all those things associated with the female triad.
How fast and how concerned are you if you see an elevated blood panel or, for a natural or a performance-enhanced athlete, if you see that creatinine maybe, 10-20% above the reference range, do you go immediately look for something and try and figure it out and get more tests, or do you go, okay, we've a very likely explanation here and we'll just kind of see how it looks over the next few weeks? Like, how do you kind of decide when it's time to panic and when it's time to, be like, okay, I'll keep an eye on this? Because a lot of times, people will get that creatinine high or similar things like that.
Yeah, obviously we work closely with the specialist. We're not making medical recommendations here. Absolutely. These are just good indicators for us to make them go see their doctor. With creatinine in particular, if it seems as though the athlete has some other potential, harmful things going on for their kidneys, then we want to get in and get a cystatin C test because the creatinine, the EGFR is an estimate, and the creatinine can be influenced by muscle tissue breakdown. So that is commonly elevated in people who lift weights, but might not be indicative of any kidney damage. And so that's when we just asked them for follow-up testing. And we want to intervene on things like on kidneys immediately, just like we want to intervene on blood pressure immediately because of its impact on the kidneys. Those things are huge. Liver function, if you're 30 days out from a competition, you might not make too many significant changes. Obviously, the weight loss would probably not be warranted if it's a powerlifting or a strongman competition. But we want to look at that long term. And there's some minor interventions that we can utilize: drinking more water, taking NAC, N-acetylcysteine. We found really good luck with just utilizing small amounts of orange juice with water periodically throughout the day. But a lot of that might just be that they're consuming more fluids. So we consider some things that we can do to get some relief in the immediate term, but long term, we're always trying to implement a program that improves those numbers. Some people respond, like those people with hypercholesterolemia might have, elevated LDLs on a diet that includes, a significant amount of cholesterol. Others may not, and there's some pretty good evidence that whole eggs and I want to say a significant, but a sufficient amount of cholesterol improves strength and hypertrophy outcomes. And so I don't want to, immediately start eliminating things like red meat and whole eggs until I see that they respond poorly to it. At which point, the intervention initially would probably be to reduce saturated fats and increase soluble fibers before we would start pulling out, nutrient-dense foods like whole eggs and red meat.
What are your kind of gold standards for things you're looking for in your athlete's blood? So I know you used to work with a company where they had a particular kind of like a suite of things to look for, but say for example in Ireland it's quite difficult to get a blood panel, a specific one. You need to kind of have reasons for why when you go see your doctor. You need to have issues, I suppose, quote unquote, and it's very hard to get a kind of a general health panel or a consistency. There's even a bit of arguing about why you would even need bloods in the first place, and why would you look at them? What's kind of recommendation in that scenario for people who are not in a circumstance where they have someone useful to work with, I suppose.
Yeah, fortunately in the United States we have pretty good access even online. I use a company called Marek Health, MAREK health.com. And I've even composed a budget panel here that's around $100. It's a very comprehensive panel. But you're right. I do get a lot of feedback from people in say Canada or the UK or Australia that don't have as simple of access or can't just do it online without a doctor and can't request the tests that they want without, like you say, without a lot of pushback. But there's some foundational things that we get. Obviously, we're going to want to just get a complete blood count, and we're going to want to get your kidney and liver enzyme functions checked. It's nice to get testosterone and thyroid, at least TSH. Those aren't terribly expensive tests, at least here in the States they aren't. But I do have a comprehensive panel that I've just asked people just to send me a DM, and I just copy and paste them the blood tests, a list of the blood tests that I recommend. Inflammation markers, C-reactive protein. Obviously, people get a urinalysis to look at fasted glucose, and get a test to look at HA1C, but those are lagging indicators. I like to see lipids so I can see if they have any leading indicators of insulin resistance, like high triglycerides, or get a fasted insulin test so I can see if they have some leading indicator of insulin resistance. So those are, just kind of a quick summary of some of the tests that we like to see.
Stan, I think one of the very interesting points you make constantly is the thing you tend to keep up on top of in the Rhinos rants is people being in better shape generally, right? And it is something, we could name a couple of sports now, but everyone knows what they are, where people tend to just be bigger. I want to be bigger. I want to be stronger. I want to be bigger. I want to be stronger. And they tend to get on this train, or they get out in front of themselves a small bit, and then suddenly their numbers aren't tallying up with their body mass where they currently are. So now suddenly they have numbers that would be respectable for an 85 kilo lifter, and they might be 100 or 110 kilos plus. In general, do you have a rule where you get them to recomposition, or do you tend to get, or is it a drop in mass that you almost immediately look for?
Kind of depends on the individual and what time of season that they're in for their competitive sport. Generally, I'm going to push pretty hard going into a competition and do whatever I can do outside of weight loss. If it's a strength sport, that's, when I worked with Hofthor, of course, they wanted to get him up to, 440 pounds, like you said, 200 kilos to compete, and then bring him down to, 390 pounds when he wasn't competing. And it was kind of a hard sell. But ultimately, he noticed that each time he bulked back up, he was able to gain less fat and have better blood markers throughout that time. It was just easier on him. So, my goal is to always look at the underlying things like blood pressure, blood thickness, obviously insulin resistance and those things. And then measure performance, because like you say, some people will add weight but not improve strength or speed. It was kind of what I talked to John Jones about when I went down there. He wanted to be 265 pounds. I said, look, you can get as heavy as you want as long as your broad jump doesn't decrease. As soon as your performance starts decreasing, then the weight is a decrement, particularly for an athlete, an explosive athlete like that, or a football player. I can't start, impacting their performance. Powerlifters, strongmen, is a little, it's a little different. Those guys, it's a 1 rep max in most cases. Most of the strongmen stuff is really heavy now. It's not the a lot of the cardio stuff that it used to be. The Arnold was a really, really heavy show. You just don't see as many of the athletes having to perform, tons of reps or medleys as much as they used to. So it's really just about keeping them as big and strong as possible, and then getting them there as easily and as healthfully as possible, and then using the off season to improve their what I call their general physical preparedness and their general health and cardio.
So on that topic of that kind of intense cardio work, see a lot of your stuff where you're doing kind of hill sprints or stair sprints, and you're doing the kind of treadmill runs, and we just don't see a lot of that with our strength athletes in particular. So, we see a lot of powerlifters, weightlifters. We don't see them doing a lot of really intense physical cardiovascular work, so for you're moving your body through space, So, one, how important does that play a role in your kind of interventions for the health side of stuff, and how do you see that kind of affecting that? And then on the other side of things, how important that is for those athletes' actual strength goals. So like, how important does it play down the chain in terms of that kind of intense cardio work?
I guess, again, it depends on the type of athlete. Now, if you're a power lifter or a strongman, I don't think sprinting has the right stimulus to fatigue ratio. I think that sprinting is very dynamic. I use an overspeed treadmill, and so it's less fatiguing on John than, say, just sprinting on a track. I don't think it would have much carryover for that specific type of athlete. Obviously, a football player would have a huge carryover benefit, and they should absolutely be in zone 5 sprinting. But mostly for strongmen and powerlifters, they're going to want to do a significant amount of zone 2. I break that up into the 10-minute walks because I find that the postprandial glycemia and the digestion is improved post-meal. And so I try and get at least 40 minutes a day of quote unquote cardio. It's zone 2. It's alactic. It's generally at a pace that you could probably talk at, but not sing. It's a deliberate, brisk, arms are swinging, has, numerous benefits for even recovering from workouts, frequency being more important than duration or quantity. And so I do think cardio is huge, but the type of cardio would really depend on the athlete. Strongmen and powerlifters, I do want them to be fast. I might initially have them run some stairs because it's pretty low impact. It's all concentric as opposed to that decelerating force from sprinting. When you're running upstairs, you just don't get as much, eccentric loading and muscle tissue breakdown and potential, injury risk. You have to watch out with powerlifters and strongmen that what the velocity is like. You get too high a velocity and you're going to start rupturing muscles. They're just too big and strong to move that fast. But in terms of speed strength, which is very important for powerlifters and strongmen, then you want to train that, I think, with, you use your 70% intensity loads, using some bands or chains, moving that weight as quickly as possible, maybe checking velocity with a meter. Those kinds of things are great, but it's not cardio necessarily. So mainly the 10-minute walks, 4 times a day. I get 40 minutes of cardio. You could also do that walking with, like Westside always loved to pull sleds. That's another way that you could stay in an alactic state and get plenty of quote unquote cardiovascular fitness that is mainly concentric and provide a lot of recuperatory benefits from your training, and help your joints continue to get lots of blood, which is the primary driver of healing for joints. It's an active therapy as opposed to passive, which I find to be much less beneficial.
Stan, just on the point when you were talking about, so obviously you're talking about training across strength training, power training, speed training, conditioning, your different zones of conditioning. How does it look when you come into kind of athletes camp, if it's John Jones and he has jiu-jitsu coaches and possibly striking coaches, and then you're coming in as a performance coach? What does that kind of dynamic look like?
Yeah, we meet with all the coaches, as we did with John at Jackson Wink. We had all the coaches there. And my main goal is some sort of concurrent model that allows him to maintain or improve each of his necessary performance objectives, depending on the time frame that we have. Whether the fight's 3 months away or 6 months away, I would make different recommendations. My main goal is to get everybody on the same page in terms of managing fatigue. That's the biggie. You have limited physical capital. It needs to be invested in multiple different areas. You can increase or decrease that capital with more sleep and better nutrition, of course. But if I've got 3 different coaches on 3 consecutive days, all trying to do high fatigue workload, he's never going to be able to recover. So I would stack the fatigue days with, say, Monday. If I was going to have him lift in the AM and then do kickboxing in the PM, that would be a pretty high fatigue day, and I would stack it. I wouldn't have him lifting hard on Monday and then kickboxing Tuesday. Tuesday would be more shadow boxing, jiu-jitsu, not going live, so that it would be kind of a low fatigue day, more skill-based stuff. And we might pull sleds, et cetera, just to keep his GPP. And the more you do, the more you can do. And so we immediately try and build his total volume, but we're very respective of his fatigue. And there's other ways to manipulate that as well. As you know, just be careful of axial loading. I don't want to put tons of weight on his spine. It's just going to create more fatigue. And so maybe more concentric movements. I've had John do, some posterior chain work, doing good mornings out of chains. And so the eccentric was crashing into the chains. And that was intentional to eliminate the decelerating force and the eccentric portion of that movement. And then just have him do the concentric up out of the chains. And that could still be reasonably heavy, but you get less fatigue from it. So those are all strategies that we utilize, collectively as coaches to get the most, get John exposed to the most stimulus with the least fatigue.
And Stan, in those cases, are you using like a real-time marker of fatigue, or are you coming in with kind of a rough idea for the volume he'll be able to handle, and then you kind of check in with a vertical jump test every week or so? Is it a kind of daily test, or what is it?
Yeah, we do test a different thing every week. Obviously, we don't want to max squat him every week. And so about every third or fourth week, we'll get him, we'll kind of see what his speed is at a 90% of 1 rep max. So we do test him on that. Things like broad jump is obviously a little less fatiguing. Managing fatigue is really a lot of feedback. A lot of it is psychological. And so, we have to kind of get his perception of how he feels. And we look at things like resting heart rate, although that's a lagging indicator. That's kind of an alarm going off that, we need to take a light day. it's not too many off days for an athlete like that. You know, a light day would be, you know, jujitsu and sled drags or a bike ride, presuming it wasn't all uphill. So, you know, so we do consistent measurements, and the coaches give us constant feedback, and his training partners as to how they feel he's performing, and we get, you know, his input, obviously.
So in terms of those lifting sessions, what are those kind of go-to lifts you have for an athlete like John, someone in a combat sport? Were you basing it off previous stuff he's done? Because I know he's been quite a fan of some powerlifting movements before. So are you coming in based off that's what he'd like to do, or was there other stuff you had that you wanted to do with him? How did that kind of look for those sessions?
Yeah, you know, when dealing with high-level athletes, you always have to include things they like to do. Or they'll go find somebody who will. And things they're good at is generally what they like to do, and those are things that you don't necessarily need to train as much. And then when you do some testing and find things that they're not so good at, they don't necessarily want to train those. So you have to find a method that allows you to improve that the athlete still you know, enjoys, I guess you should say the word. He was very strong at deadlifting, and so his posterior, or his quads were really strong, but the lockout was not as strong, and we found that the hamstrings, which is typical, as you know, posterior chain is generally neglected, hamstrings in particular, and so we threw him on a glute ham raise and found that he wasn't very powerful there. But within just a few short weeks, you know, we had him up to doing 20 reps on glute ham raises. And that was, you know, very effective. Obviously, we push-pull legs, you know, and then run, jump, throw. We use the push-pull legs to create the strength foundation so that he can run faster and jump higher and throw more powerfully, which are more, you know, that's your GPP kind of slowly transitioning into your specific physical preparedness. For running, we use the overspeed treadmill. Speed is huge, and it's the least fatiguing, and we could utilize it for both top end speed and for endurance, doing intervals. For you know, jumping, mostly it was just speed strength. Like I mentioned, we try and move heavy weights fast. You know, multiple repetitions. We still kept them down in the strength zone around 5 reps with heavy weight. But just tried to move them as much as possible concentrically and explosively. And so that's kind of how we designed the program. It's pretty standard. And then progress it over time. We measure everything and then challenge him to improve, you know, 1 more rep, 1 more set, or 5 more pounds over time.
So for that sport-specific fitness for, you know, MMA or the jiu-jitsu training, did you find that the steady-state cardio had a large impact, or did you find that you had to go to those kind of higher intensity zones, or was it definitely a mix of both of those having the most impact?
Yeah, we utilized both. He already has incredible endurance, and so we really focused more on speed than endurance, and also the type of speed, hip extension. You know, that's why we liked the posterior chain stuff. That's why we liked the treadmill as opposed to running up hills, because usually you keep your hips back and your stride shortens. And you know, if I want a wrestler per se to have a better shoot and takedown, then I'm going to work on posterior chain. I'm going to work on what it takes to get their hips forward. And so we might, if we run hills or run them on the treadmill, it's less fatigue, but we'll make sure that his hips are forward and his stride length doesn't get compromised. And so those are some ways that we can challenge him, but also make sure that we're targeting the right muscles.
Awesome. Do you want to move on to the business one?
Yes. How much time have you got left, Stan?
I don't know. What time is it?
I think it's 7:45 in...
Yeah, let's do
yes.
it. We can still go. I'd probably be 15 minutes before I got to wake the kids up for school.
Perfect.
Brilliant.
So do you want to go...
I'll do the...
Or do you want to do the...
I can't. I don't have my glasses on.
Oh, yeah, the glasses. Fascinating. What do you think?
We do quick 5 minutes on
Yes.
staying jacked to 55, and
Okay.
then I'll move on to business.
Okay.
Thanks very much again
Thanks,
for
Stan.
this.
We
Stan.
appreciate it. We're trying to cover as much
Sure.
as... Stan, so obviously you are probably one of the most jacked 50 plus, well, one of the most jacked people going out compared to the average person, but at 50 plus, it's, you know, very impressive the level of physique and strength you still maintain with what seems to be a lot of ease, you know, those 600 pound squats you're repping, and when you do some deadlifts. How did you find that changed in your 50s, composed as opposed to maybe in your 20s and stuff like that? Did the sessions look drastically different? Do you find it's a lot easier to maintain because you've been strength training for so long? Is there stuff you get your clients to do that maybe they've started training in their 40s that you do differently in your 40s and 50s?
A lot different. I don't recover as well as I used to. I can't train as heavy as often. I know Instagram always gets my top end lifts, and that's exciting. Yeah. If I showed you behind the scenes the things that I had to do in order to be able to perform like that relatively infrequently in comparison to my history, it would be rather boring. And it's the same stuff. Every single day I take at least 3 to 4 10-minute walks, or walking backwards on a 15-degree incline treadmill at 2 miles an hour. I'll do intervals on that. Dragging sleds, recumbent bike under modest tension. I do those things 3 to 4 times a day. I get 30 to 40 minutes worth of quote unquote cardio every single day. Mine is specific. It's intentionally separated because I find that lends itself better to recovery and digestion and glucose control. My sleep has to be right on point. Most days, if I can, I'll get a 20-minute cat nap. I just drop down wherever I am and throw on some earphones and a headset and just set my alarm and try and get 20 minutes. Those are the biggies. Obviously, my nutrition's on point. I've been very strict with that for decades, and I can't cheat all that often, nor do I really have the desire to. I've kind of always been the type that felt like if I had room in my stomach, I was going to put something in there that improved my performance. And you've heard me say I don't eat foods I like. I eat foods that like me, and I make that decision about an hour after I eat. And I'm all about delayed gratification. If I look at something that might taste good in the immediate, but I know I'm going to be sprinting to the bathroom in 30 minutes to an hour, it's easy for me to pass over it. I already know what's going to happen. So I don't train as heavy as often. Maybe once every 8 days, I'll do a heavy lift, and it would be either a deadlift or a squat. The in-between workouts are more hypertrophy stuff, more concentric loading, more range of motion with lighter weight, the kinds of things, less axial loading overall, so my lumbar doesn't get smashed too many times a week. And those kinds of things collectively, it's never any one thing, it's always a combination of many things, allows me to stay pain-free. At 54 years old, having a long history of chronic tendonitis and hips and knees and those kinds of things that you would expect from powerlifting. I'm absolutely pain-free. You see me squat reasonable amount of weight with no knee wraps or sleeves, walked out. They feel great. I don't have any niggling aches or pains. I can jump on a bike or a treadmill or take a walk anytime I want with no pain. Those things are more important to me, of course, than the numbers. And I say that knowing that I couldn't lift what I used to lift anyhow. There's been times at which over the last probably 5 years, as I reached 50, I was kind of, there's some video of me right as I hit 50, I was trying to set the over 50 world record in powerlifting. And I was doubling 750 pound deadlifts, and I ended up getting injured. And, it was just accumulation of fatigue. And I hurt my back. And so I'm just not as interested in paying that price anymore.
It's funny. You're in a select group of people who have incredibly impressive numbers, and now the numbers don't matter anymore. It's almost always the people who have very, very good history of training where the numbers don't matter as much anymore.
I've just seen too many people have career-ending injuries, particularly as they get older. I pushed the envelope as far as I could. I was 45 years old when I totaled that 2303. And I was 5 pounds away from something tearing off the bone, I'm sure of it, in one of those lifts. And I look back now and I'm kind of glad that I just stopped when I stopped, and that I've had a couple reminders since then. And I really enjoy, I just love training. And that's why I do all these other things. I sleep well, eat well, and recover well, so I can have that incredible hour 3 or 4 days a week in the gym, whatever it may be, like today's squats. And I'm really looking forward to it. I woke up early this morning to get with you guys, just to make sure that, I've got a little visit at my kid's school. And then when I leave there, I'm going straight to the gym, and it's all I can think about. And my entire day will be euphoric as a result. And a lot of people my age kind of dread it. They consider it an obligation, and it's somewhat painful. I don't feel that way, because I try not to make it onerous to the point where I am subjecting myself to injury, or just continuing to accumulate fatigue that just makes me tired all the time. I'm just not willing to do it. So I've kind of redefined my goals, and now I'll occasionally I'll throw a heavy bar on there, but generally not over 90%. But most of the time I'm shortening the clock, and I like to do things like 5x5s, where certainly the fourth and fifth sets are really challenging, but it's only a 70% load. So my exposure to injury is pretty minimal.
I think as well, probably just a note on that for people listening, the absolute weight you're lifting matters too, so the lifts you did, and that you would need to get back to if you wanted to improve are, monumental weights for any individual's body to handle. So just because we frequently get questions where it's someone's, 45 and they're like, do you think I'd ever squat double body weight? And you're like, I think you'll manage, I think you'll get there. So it's just important to remember that obviously the weights that you were lifting in powerlifting are far beyond probably what most people listening to this, if they've started training in their 40s, need to be concerned about. So it's not, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's probably not a concern for them, to push themselves in training. Like the magnitude of the lifts are a little bit different, I think.
You're 100% right. Yeah, the magnitude of the lifts, like we were talking about, that my triple is probably, or my 3 to 5 rep max right now is probably 600 pounds. That's going to create a lot of fatigue.
Yes.
But beginners or intermediate people, you could, just like the starting strength method, you could squat 3 times a week and still progress on 5x5s for a long time before the weight got so heavy that the stimulus to fatigue ratio was compromised. And so, as long as people are cautious about programming, so they don't progress at too fast a pace, and potentially expose themselves to repetitive strain, because you do want to recover from each workout. Then there's 2 things to look out for, obviously, the load and the repetitions. And as long as you're patient and gradual, and persistent and consistent, I think that folks should be endeavoring to get the double body weight squat and deadlift. That's a very reasonable goal.
Stan, as the last point, just before you go, the other reason I think you're phenomenally well known is what Owen in the email has coined your serial entrepreneurship, but your widely successful business in kind of multiple different areas. You've a finger in a lot of different pies. A lot of our listeners and viewers of the channel they're kind of up and coming strength and conditioning coaches. They're learning to be personal trainers. Do you have some quick tips for those guys and girls who are starting off their own business or starting down that rabbit hole? What would be the best things for them to focus on?
Or even since COVID, a load of people have trying to change careers in their own business, like unrelated to fitness, and they've mentioned it to us,
Yeah. Well, I hate to keep pimping my information. Obviously I've got that Vertical Diet 3.0 ebook, which covers nutrition and training. I've been in 14 countries in all 50 states. I've done over 200 seminars. I've met hundreds of coaches and been to hundreds of gyms, met thousands of personal trainers. I was even coaching the personal trainers at Good Life gym chain, the largest in Canada. And I've seen successful business models and unsuccessful business models, many of them. And I've been an entrepreneur all my life and built 5 multi-million-dollar companies in the last 17 years. And so I feel like I have some good information to offer here. I put a book together called Building a Career in the Fitness Industry that's on my website. It's an ebook, but it goes over step by step and very easy step by step program on what you need to do to make a career. I'm talking, buy a home, raise kids, put them to college, a 6-figure career in personal training. It's very reasonable. We've got a working model, a 20-year veteran of the gym personal training business who owns 2 gyms and has a dozen personal trainers in Ohio. Matt Whittemer joined me on this project. And it's definitely doable. I just did a pretty lengthy podcast on it on Mark Bell's podcast last couple weeks ago, and gave a lot more details than we have time for today. But I strongly encourage people to do that. I was a personal trainer in college, after college. I studied exercise science and worked at gyms, and been a personal trainer all my life. I still train people. I trained people while I was owning and operating numerous businesses throughout that were unrelated. It's just been a passion of mine all my life, and I think that people should be compensated for their efforts in such a way that it can be, a rewarding career, and they can, also, have a good lifestyle. It's not, private airplanes and yachts and photo shoots in front of Ferraris. It's just not my MO. It's just, foundational principles. I tend to be pretty OCD, as I've acknowledged many, many times. You said I've had my fingers on a lot of projects. Well, I've had a lot of projects fail as well. And I say you can be great at anything, but you can't be great at everything. And I do think that you need to aim at a specific target and then repeat the kinds of behaviors over and over again that gets you closer and closer to that target. Break down your path. One of the things that I said in a podcast once, or I think it was in a rant, that I think bodybuilding was great for my OCD because it was so regimented in terms of, workouts, sets and reps and meal prepping and planning and pre-competition and, all the stuff that goes into it. Your whole day and week and months were all scheduled ahead of you. I said, if anybody would employ that same kind of discipline, consistency, and time management to any income producing venture, one of your preference, you'd be a millionaire in less than 5 years. There's no question in my mind. It's just that, have you selected a particular goal? Have you broken that down into, achievable chunks? And are you consistently, knocking away at that day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, which, I have done now for over 3 decades in both bodybuilding and powerlifting and in business. So those are kind of, in general, those are my recommendations. Is just write down your goal, break it down into achievable, progressible, daily behaviors, and then just go about implementing those and consistently implementing those on a daily basis. But it had better be something that you enjoy, because it's willpower is no way to power through things that you hate doing. You're just like your body fights you when you diet. It's going to fight you if you try and force it to do things you don't enjoy doing.
Have you any future endeavors that you're thinking about, or anything new coming up? Or are you pretty happy what you have going?
Now it's pretty much, I'm just working with great athletes. Obviously, the Vertical Diet in itself has been a very successful company. We have the ebooks, we have seminars, we have online training, we have the meal prep company. I'm writing another ebook, or I wrote numerous other ebooks already that are on the website. Strong, Stronger, Strongest, specific to power athletes. Fast, Faster, Fastest, specific to track athletes, and of course the building a career in the fitness industry. But now I'm writing Vertical Kids, which I think is going to be one of the best books that I've got. It's really going to be an educational opportunity for parents and kids to come together and learn about their bodies and performance and goal setting and breaking those things down into a lot of it's compliance things that you can easily comply with day to day. I've always said compliance is the science, and all that conversation we just had about business and all the stuff that I mentioned about the athletes that I trained and making things on them easier. They seem like little things, but that, I design everything so that habits can be formed, and that, things like meal prepping and traveling becomes very manageable, whether you're, a real estate agent or working out of the trunk of your car, or a police, fire, and ambulance, just having access having what you need when you need it, saving you time and money. I mentioned time management and efficiency. Then it's a lot more likely that you're going to be able to become a lifestyle, and you'll be able to consistently implement these things on a daily basis, and you become more efficient and effective. And then you can take on more responsibility, more goals, manage a family, kids, career, those kinds of things, but still have your fitness pursuit. Rather than having to give up one for the other.
No, it's some great advice.
Yep.
Stan, thanks very much for your time. We appreciate it hugely, and we're very, very long time fans of the rants and of the vertical diet, obviously.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
That's great.
We really appreciate it, Stan. Thanks so much. Stan, where do you want people to go find you at the moment, or what's your kind of main kind of endeavors at right now?
Everything's at Stan Efferding. StanEfferding.com is my website. At Stan Efferding is my Instagram. I have some great YouTube content. My rants is going to be also Stan Efferding on YouTube. And of course, the Vertical Diet Meal Prep Company, available nationwide in the United States and UK now, is at theverticaldiet.com.